Hey everyone, welcome back to PIP, or if this is your first time, welcome to our Partners in Prevention podcast, where we explore the everyday conversations, choices, and actions that help create safer, healthier relationships and prevent violence before it starts. So I'm KP, I'm the Violence Prevention Specialist at Law's Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services.
And I'm Jen, the Violence Prevention Manager. And again, we're so glad you're joining us. Today's episode is all about teens and kiddos, relationships, and how to be safe online and offline. So we'll be talking about what teens are seeing online and how social media shapes those ideas about dating and social norms, and some of the challenges young people are navigating today and how trusted adults can support them.
And this conversation is not about criticizing social media or saying, kids these days, they're always on their phones. They're always talking to someone and texting. But it is not about that. We're not trying to criticize social media. It's more about understanding the world that young people are growing up in today. Let's be honest, tech and social media have been moving fast in the past 25 years. So I think we could all benefit from some online literacy regardless of age. So we're really excited to have our two guests joining us today. First, we have Lisa Donovan, who is our Child Advocacy Center Director here at Law's Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services. Lisa, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us about all of the amazing work that you guys do at the CAC.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Lisa Donovan. I'm the director at the Loudoun County Child Advocacy Center. And the CAC we're a space for children to come when there are concerns for abuse. We work as a multidisciplinary team, which includes law enforcement, child protective services, the prosecutor's office, mental health advocates, and medical professionals and victim advocates. And we all work together as a team to provide support to children when they come to the CAC. When they do come here, they meet with a forensic interviewer to share what they have experienced. And while that's happening, the caregivers are receiving some support and some education on the process. They get their questions answered, and it's a full supportive system. And basically, our goal is to make sure that children are heard, that they are being supported, and that the focus stays on their health and their healing, and they are not alone throughout that process.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's so good to have you on here, Lisa, because I know a lot of the work that you do is not, as public facing, right? A lot of those referrals come directly from law enforcement and other community partners in Loudoun County. But the expertise that you all have is really needed in this conversation as we're talking about this back to school, back to safety part. So really excited to hear about all that you have to offer.
Thank you.
And then we're also joined by Roshni Rao, who recently graduated from high school here in Loudoun County. And she also previously volunteered with us as part of Loudoun Youth's Claude Community Builders. So we're so excited to have your perspective here too. You're much closer to what the teens are experiencing than we are. So you can give us that special perspective. But if you want to just give a little intro of what you're up to these days and how you became involved.
Hi, everyone. I'm Roshni, and I have been volunteering with Laws for a little over a year now. And like Jen said, I recently just graduated from high school, and I'm about to start my first year of college. So
exciting. Yeah, and Roshni's been so great. And we really, like we kind of said in our last episode, we really rely on the youth perspective. And just, again, I'll say it a million times, but Loudoun County youth are a different breed. And Roshni has just been so amazing. She just jumps right into all the projects we've thrown at her, and the expertise that she has is really valuable as well. So we're excited to dive in.
I kind of wanted to first start off our conversation on the more of the local level and kind of pose this first question to you, Lisa. With the beginning of the school year starting back, I think the first day of school for Loudoun County youth was yesterday. And so we've seen in the past, there's a lot of disclosures that can come out during the beginning of the school year. We may hear from the kiddos themselves or the staff that are working with them on different problems that are coming up at the very beginning of the school year. And some of us are like, what the heck? It just started. They just got back into class. So what does the beginning of the school year look like for you guys at the Child Advocacy Center? Are you seeing a high prevalence of disclosures or maybe a lower rate? Is it specific age groups? But what does the start of the school year look like for you guys?
So, the start of the school year can be a very busy time for the CAC. Kids are just getting back to school and they're being around their teachers, nurses, counselors, coaches, and things like that who are interacting with kids every day. And they are the ones that typically will notice changes in behavior, changes with the child, things like that. And so we do see a prevalence of referrals here shortly after school starts. And a lot of times it's not because school just started and abuse increases. It really is more about children are around safe adults, adults that they feel comfortable talking to and sharing with. And it really is important that those teachers and counselors and coaches and caregivers notice those different behaviors. And if there is anything concerning to make that report. They don't need to investigate it. But if a child is sharing something with you, it is important that they are heard and believed. And a lot of those reports do come from the school system because children feel safe to disclose to their teachers typically.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting what you said. And we'll talk more about like safe adults and what that means later on in the podcast, but just that, so much of kids' lives are at school, right? And so having trusted adults there is really important. And like you said, maybe the abuse all of a sudden isn't spiking at the beginning of the year, but they have more of those trusted adults in their circle. So that's really interesting. On kind of more the older youth side, Roshni, sometimes we hear from people that relationships, are forming over the summer, or maybe there's breakups. And then what does the beginning of the school year look like for you? And when you were a high schooler returning back, was there ever talk about like online things that happened and problems from the break coming back to school in person?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the beginning of the school year is definitely very hard on some people because it kind of brings everything back together, over the summer. It's kind of like out of sight, out of mind, it's separate from your, everything you've been seeing in school, but then you come back, you see them around school, walking the hallways and everything, and it can kind of be really challenging. And I also like kind of talking about social media, but I think that makes it slightly harder because even over the summer, like you don't really get a break from them. You're constantly seeing what they post, what they do. You're it's so easily accessible and you can so easily check on what they're doing and what they're up to. So sometimes like even things that happened months ago can feel like very real and present when you come back. So
Yeah. Yeah, such a good point of, it's when you're at school, it's kind of you're having more of that face-to-face interaction. There's kind of you blend the real and the offline and online, but during the summer, it can be more of just like, yeah, the offline stuff that you're seeing or friends that are hanging out without you or, your relationships going on that, it becomes a little more complicated. So I think that's really interesting. I know, it's been a while since I was in high school and I feel like I was just kind of on the very beginning of when social media was really used. But I can't even imagine how much, like, since it's exploded so much of just navigating all that while you're also navigating, maybe your first relationship or, all of the drama that comes with high school anyway, just feels like amplified with social media. So yeah, it's a little different being a teen today.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, Jen. I was just like, I can't imagine trying to go through school the way that we did. And, that was the beginning of technology entering the classroom. And Jen, maybe 1 year older than me, but we definitely experienced the time period of wheeling in the TV into the classroom to watch a movie. And now Jen and I will go in and do presentations into high schools, and it's the high schoolers teaching us how to use the Promethean boards. And so it's just crazy to think whether it's social media or tech as a whole, how it's impacting kids today in these crucial years of their lives. And I was just thinking of that, what you guys think of what it is like to be a teen today compared to even 10 years ago. Like, what do you guys kind of feel as being different? And I kind of want to open this up to everyone of and even Rosh, even though you're just in high school, it's like, what did you see as the high school life? I think through pop culture as well, like when you were a kid, like those high school movies, but just for everyone, yeah, it's just like, how do you guys see being a teen today being different from even 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, etc.? Yeah.
Well, I think that the biggest difference would be how much more social media's been involved in everyday life, from even like the smallest of things to the biggest of decisions. For example, right now, the school year starting, there has been a flood of information and advice about how, the school year and what to do, how to act, and all this advice. And while that comes from a good place, it can be really overwhelming and challenging for students to navigate that and kind of pick apart what is the right kind of advice and what they should listen to while just ignoring the rest. And it it feels like you also have to measure yourself to those standards. So if people say something that you can't relate to, it's like, well, what am I doing that I'm not at that level? And while 10 years ago, kids were thinking about how they were perceived and they were super conscious about it, it's really amplified now with social media. Now it's not just about who sees you in person and the things you do when you're with someone, but also about how you present yourself online and how other people might interpret what you're doing or what you're saying online, and how that can be miscommunicated. And even something as simple as putting up a story or posting something, it can be taken in so many different ways, because you're like, who's going to see this? What are they going to think? Are they, you know, going to feel some type of way about it? Like, what's going to come out of me posting this? And so I feel like that level of pressure is just really kind of at a really big magnitude compared to, I would say, 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think even just it's not only, posting for you, it's posting for an audience, and like what you're projecting to that audience could be different from how you behave, offline, or you want to, project this aura that maybe isn't true to who you really are, but also maybe you're also managing the emotions of people. Like, you don't think about it. Implicitly, you're being like, okay, how is this going to make this person feel? And like, the audiences are big. I think I really only talk to like 5 or 10 people in my life, but then all of a sudden my life is out there for, hundreds to see. And what is some of the feedback I'm going to get? That can be really daunting.
Yeah, and there seems to be you're connected, but you're not really connected, and it's this false connection. And I think connection's so important for everybody, but certainly for young people. And like you mentioned, like some of these influencers, they are presenting a very curated version of themselves. And so for even younger youth that are watching these things, this isn't the standard. This isn't, and trying to measure themselves to that, I think can be really a real struggle to measure up, and thinking, well, they have it all together. And it's like, do they?
Yeah.
And so I think adults have difficulty navigating that. So you can imagine young people struggling to really understand what's going on there. And yeah.
And I think kind of relating to that, it's so hard being given access to this plethora of information and then being like, well, don't listen to that, because you're so lost and you're so confused about so much of your high school, so much of your college life, and you just want some advice. You want to know, how you can be better prepared. And then you're told that, well, this advice might not be like the best, or it might not be like catered to you. And then it's just like also confusing, because what are you supposed to listen to? Like, even for right now, for example, for college, I'm like looking at all these videos about like packing and what I should bring. And every video I watch is a new thing that people are like telling me to bring. But how else am I supposed to figure it out, So I feel like that also makes it hard, because people don't really want to reach out to people. You just feel like you're constantly bothering them. So the internet is just so easy and so safe, and you just feel like, okay, you can just go on this, it's easy, you're done,
I think that's such an interesting point too, of, for a lot of people, and I'll say not just, young people or kids or teens, but for a lot of people, that's their source of information. That's their source of news. That's the source of, where they go to for advice, like you're saying. And when you get so much mixed messaging, or even just get advice, like Lisa was saying, from those curated perspectives from influencers, sometimes it's not the best advice, right? And especially I think that the stakes are so high with like relationships, and we'll talk more about some of those influencers and maybe their negative effects later on. But yeah, I think it's really interesting when the source of so much information is found in social media by unreliable authors, right? And unreliable, people who haven't done the research and just, are going on a whim. So that's really interesting. Roshni, I want to ask you if adults, I feel like we're always trying to bridge the gap between adults and kids, right? Speaking the same language. But if adults could understand one thing about teenagers today and some of the things that we've talked about, what would it be?
Um, I would say maybe just like understanding that some of the things that feel smaller to them can feel so significant to teenagers, you know? And it doesn't mean that like every time we come to you with some sort of like a problem or anything, this isn't a big deal, because that's not necessarily helpful and it can feel very like demeaning. And so I would say probably like if a teenager's coming up to someone about something, just like probably understand that it matters enough to them for them to go out of their way to bring it up. So just like, be patient and listen to them. So just like listening and taking them seriously, I feel like can make a huge difference.
I love that advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just
Very
going to
good
say, I
advice.
think the validation is huge. That's one thing that we work on even with when you're handling a disclosure, whether that's from a child or an adult, and being validating of that experience for them. And that validation carries on even through, less traumatic experiences and events that go through our lives, even stressors and things that cause us anxiety, especially with teens now. It's, a lot of times we hear that, like I said earlier, kids these days. But to me, it's like, it should be like kids these days kind of thing. Like they're struggling with a lot that we did not have to deal with because of social media and technology. And so there needs to be that bit of grace between adults and kids. And I think it also takes extra grace for ourselves as adults to be like, I do not know this fully and completely. And that can sometimes create that resistance when a problem does come up from a child from one of these platforms. If we don't know a lot about it, that kind of makes us feel insecure and not as able to help. So I really like that of wanting to let them know that validation is really key for that. Yeah.
Well, and I liked Rashi's point of if I'm bringing it up with you, it's important to me. And I think it kind of goes to that, being connected and being curious and really asking those questions to learn more. And I think that's validating.
Yeah, exactly. Approaching with curiosity. And kind of going a little bit into whether in just relationships in general and social media. When Jen and I are out in the community doing presentations, we say it a lot. Young people are learning about relationships from everywhere. And if it's not from the parents, it's going to be from someone else. It's going to be from their friend on the bus sitting next to them. It's going to be someone who gets their phone. I know there's a bell-to-bell no phones anymore in LCBS, but anytime that there is technology available to a child, they are able to access and ask anything, whether it's about relationships or more of the taboo topics that parents may not be as willing to talk about. And increasingly, it is social media that we've seen kids turning to. And so I want to ask, open this up to everyone. But first, I want to start off with Roshni. What kinds of messages do you see or are teens seeing online today about dating and relationships in general? Is it kind of like those advice things that you were talking about, or is it more off of pop culture? But what you guys are seeing?
hmm So I would honestly say that there's a huge range. You can see like really positive content about communication and healthy relationships, but you can also see content that like romanticizes like jealousy or controlling behavior. And so that's very confusing. And I'm sure people like, right now I can kind of differentiate obviously like being like, okay, this is bad content, this is good content, but obviously as a kid, younger youth, like, it might be a little harder. I think the harder part is it's almost all packaged as entertainment, humor. And so that also can be harder to recognize when it's like, are they joking? Is it actually unhealthy? Is it not? And I think the hard part is also just people have so much to say and you're kind of trying to process all of this information. And also, gossip spreads so fast in real life. So if you can imagine on social media, that's like even crazier. And so a little kind of trend like a couple years ago was how people would say if he wanted to, he would. And so I think that originally was intended like, okay, if the person wants to make the effort, then they will go out of their way to make the effort. But the way it has spiraled into people just being like, if they wanted to, they would. And it's like, people like they can't read your mind, So it's also like if so they wouldn't. It's like this crazy unrealistic expectation. So even if some advice comes from like a good intention and it comes out like being said this certain way, it kind of transforms this completely different ideology or this understanding of it, because there's thousands of people online and it's just really up to interpretation. So it also just kind of goes crazy like that too. So
Yeah, that's such a good point, Roshni. Of just like, we talk so much when we're presenting to youth. We just were at the Juvenile Detention Center last week and we were talking about like online literacy, and it's so hard to piece together. But I think the point that you brought up too of like so much of it is couched in satire. So it's like, when are they joking? When is this a joke? And then it becomes this huge joke. Like if he wanted to, he would, right? So I think that was an awesome point of just like, yeah, how are we supposed to expect kids to kind of parse through this and critically think when it's just like, oh, it's for the laughs, and they're just scrolling and then they internalize it as truth. So that was a great point.
And I think it also goes beyond messages because, you see like all this content, but with no social media, you just see the content, you think about it, and it's kind of done. But now you have this extra platform for people to voice their opinions. And while that's a great thing in some cases, you're also able to see all these opinions, and that makes you start thinking as well. And I'd like to give a small example of something that's been recently like going on, but like the Love Island season just ended. And while obviously like it's an entertaining watch and there are obviously millions of people that watch it and kind of just move on, but there's been so many people online kind of just like breaking down every single aspect of every person's relationship. And it doesn't just like end at the show. It goes beyond the show. And so if they're seen in public, a little TikTok they post, and there's so many of these creators that just make videos about other like pop stars or celebrities, and they debrief this, they break it down. And it's like there are so many people that are just very parasocial when it comes to these type of things. And it's like, so it's not even just someone's directly telling you, oh, this is a good relationship, but you see this and you're like, okay, like Bryce and Trinity won Love Island, maybe I should be more like them. And it's like, well, you see such a small part of their lives and you see such a small part of who they are and what their relationship is like. And obviously Love Island is different. You see like much more of their day, but even now people are like obvious in their comments, all this, and it's like, just like let it go and focus on your own like life and your own relationships. And because even if you make mistakes along the way and even if you mess up, it's okay. People are understanding, everyone's making mistakes, but instead of trying to be perfect and finding all this advice on social media, just like do a trial and error and figure it out yourself. So I don't know.
Totally. Yeah, I didn't even know what the word parasocial meant until very recently. And like, it's so true. It's like having these relationships with people that we don't really know. We're totally breaking down their lives. We're seeing, and we're emulating them too. Like you said, like, oh, they won the show. That means I should, act just like them. And yeah, that I feel like that could be really dangerous too. So I wanted to ask Lisa, from your perspective, working with kids and teens, what concerns you the most of what's going on out there in the online world?
Well, many concerns. We do see kids here who have been talking to people online. And I think what happens is something that is fun and joyful and social turns into something that's harmful, and they find out that this person has been deceiving and things like that. And so trying to navigate all of those things online, especially, our younger youth. And so really helping them understand the differences of navigating online, because we can't just say don't interact online. it is really giving them the tools to be able to be online safely and understand those differences and those boundaries of somebody who is a safe person to talk to versus somebody who isn't, and having those conversations, those open conversations with your parents or caregivers to really make sure, because parents don't always know what's going on. And sometimes they think, well, they'll tell me if there's a problem, but they don't always tell you. They may not even know. So being connected and asking those questions and being curious, tell me about that game, or tell me about, who you're talking to, or, asking those questions and being available to provide that supportive guidance is, I think, really critical. But there are a lot of resources out there. The Carly Ryan Foundation has some great resources on different apps and safety tips and tools for parents. And I would encourage parents to talk with their kids about it, not just, you can't use your phone or, put these privacy things in place, but really talk about why that's important and really have that shared understanding of what that means. And so there are some good resources, but I highly recommend that.
Like you were saying, like sometimes it's just daunting for parents to be like, I don't even know. Like there are apps that I don't know about, like Roblox and Discord, and I am like, I have no idea what this is about. But I love that you shared with us recently those fact sheets from the Carly Ryan Foundation. We can probably link them here to our episode, but just like that gives you kind of a base knowledge of what questions to ask. Because like you were saying, sometimes the kids don't even know what's healthy or unhealthy. And I think I really like the point of driving home of like being curious, not judgmental, right? Of coming in with that curiosity instead of being like, what are you doing? How did you get here?
Right.
So.
And you don't have to, as a parent, you don't have to know everything about that technology and the apps. You just have to be willing to step into their world and ask those questions from a curious perspective and learn. I think, some youth do like to teach their parents, and I don't know, some may be like, stay off Facebook. We saw what happened there. But it is important that you do engage and have those conversations.
Yeah, we see this importance with, like you were saying, sometimes kids don't even know what they're experiencing is unhealthy or is abuse. And it's so important for those parents to not just be that person to have some information that they may need, but be approachable.
Right.
To their child, to their teenager for that. And I think we've seen even recently with research. So I'll shout out our former supervisor, Colleen McDaniel, doctor, who's at It's On Us now. They recently did a research report on men's sex needs with, or like sex education needs. So they did a report that surveyed over 1,000 men across the country that are in colleges right now. And what it showed was that most college men at this time, their first experience learning about some form of sex or relationships was through social media, was through media. And so it's immediately like, okay, if our kids are learning about this at whatever age, we need to be prepared as parents to have those conversations and make those conversations accessible to the child. So when they do see that first initial thing to deal with this taboo topic on social media, they feel comfortable going up to their parents and asking them, hey, I saw this. What is this? And we've even seen in that report as well, kind of how you were saying that connection that kids need with their parents and their family members and their community. Most college men really benefited the most from sex education through a community setting. And we saw that at higher rates among like BIPOC communities, for example. They really turned to those community spaces and education among men and boys. And we a lot of times can rely on the school systems or on these things that are already kind of put in place, whether that's sex education or family life education. And, Jen and I work with the schools closely. We work on that education to make sure it's prevention focused and really focused on everyone, not just one specific gender. But at the same time, we can't rely on this idea of these conversations only need to happen in the school. We
Right.
really have to encourage parents and family members and community members. The more we talk about it and the more we normalize these conversations, the easier it is to bring up these things if something potentially happens. And if there's a potential act of maybe their child's doing something that could be potentially violent, making that pathway very open and clear between the parent and the child. A parent can step in and say, hey, that's an unhealthy behavior. Let's talk about this. But always coming from that sense of curiosity. I love
Yeah.
the curiosity is not what killed the cat. The curiosity is what's good here in these situations. Because, like Jen said, coming from that approach of what is that? What is on your phone? What are you doing? Immediately shifts that child or that teen into, I don't want to open up to you anymore. But
Mhm.
like you said as well, kind of giving them the option to be the educator in that role and be like, oh, you don't know about Discord? Well, let me show you. And having that learning experience can then open up that chance for that parent to have their own learning experience through that app of, well, do you know how to have healthy conversations on here? You've showed me how the app works. Let me show you how communication works on this app. So making it really kind of that beneficial relationship and discussion between parents and kids is so important.
Yeah, I mean, social media and the online interactions, they're not going away, right? We have to learn how to use them in healthy ways, just like we use anything, right? So there's unhealthy and healthy ways to do things. So social media itself, I don't think we can, call it inherently good or bad, but it's powerful, right? And
Mhm.
we'll talk a little bit more about specifically maybe a side of social media that we want to dive into.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking it's definitely powerful, but I think Jen was kind of hinting there. I think we can kind of all agree there is definitely a negative side or a negative. One side of social media is definitely negative, and that's gotten a lot of attention lately, and that is the manosphere. So for listeners who may not know, Jen, how would you explain the manosphere in simple terms?
Yeah, so I do want to be careful here because I do think there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. We talked about like last episode of how, so much of masculinity has been tied up into toxic masculinity, right? It's just automatically paired to that. So I want to all acknowledge that the manosphere may have good, aspects to it as well. But simply put, the manosphere is part of the internet where people talk about being a man, what it's like being a man, relationships and dating. And some of these spaces do offer support, kind of in the ways that KP was talking about in community, right? But others often spread harmful ideas about women, gender, and power. And so some of the terms you may have heard, I know there was recently a Netflix documentary about this, which I will say, I don't think it really highlighted the need for intervention in the manosphere, might have glorified the influencers a little bit, but some of those online influencers are like the Andrew Tates. If you've heard of the Looks Max or Clavicular or the podcast Fresh and Fit, those are some of the sources that kind of fuel the manosphere. And like we said, they uplift those rigid gender roles. You might have heard of alpha and beta males or red pilling. And all of this was very new to me as well. I'm not part of the manosphere. That's not my algorithm. So it's just been really interesting, like learning about it of, incels, men's rights, activism. So I'm curious, Roshni, from your perspective, do students know about this? Do they talk about it? These influences or topics? Do people take them seriously? Because I know sometimes when we're like, what's the manosphere? People will be like, I don't know, but once we kind of dive in, manosphere might be kind of that academic term. We like our academic terms, but do you feel like that's reached the high school level?
100%. Everybody talks about this stuff all the time, and not even like just like in the past, like this has been going on for years. So it's like a very, very common topic, whether it is with like guys again discussing what kind of goes on in their perspective or girls discussing it and talking about their opinions or whatever. It's definitely very, very, very prevalent in high school and just teenagers' lives. Whether we take this seriously or not, that kind of is talking about a different thing. I think a lot of the time people see these clips and they think they're like, oh, funny or controversial. And then, because it's like the algorithm keeps pushing out that kind of content. And so if you share it, it's reappearing on your For You page. and people are like obviously sharing this content and like, whatever, interacting with it because they think it's like funny maybe, or it's kind of like an extreme of what they believe in. So if there's something you believe in and it's like set to like an extreme version, like you're gonna still kind of believe in that. So like I'm sure that's like a perspective some people are feeling, but also like, people just share with their friends and they're like, oh my God, this is like so like ridiculous. Like, look at what's going on. And so that's like, I think kind of what makes it so nuanced, where it's like, you don't necessarily like have to actively seek it out for it to just be on your For You page. And so that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, Roshni. Again, when we're talking about, are we really taking it seriously? Are we not? And I think sometimes when we say these terms like the manosphere, we're like, we're really fearing this radicalization is happening to all these boys and men, right? But I attended a really interesting webinar recently by Equimundo and Futures Without Violence. They just issued this research brief about men's media intake and key takeaways. And I think it kind of lent that more nuanced view of the manosphere is super pervasive, like you were saying, Roshni. Like you said, it doesn't take much for it to show up on your For You page. And we've also seen stats like within 30 minutes, boys will be exposed to that if they, stay on long enough. And we know that feeds the algorithm. But it also talked about in the report that most men don't subscribe to these channels. Maybe most men are just like looking at it and being like, haha, I would never think that, So they might only just interact surface level. But kind of what we were talking about before is most men want the same things everyone wants. It's that connection, purpose, healthy relationships, a sense of belonging. And sometimes that's where they find community. That's where they find belonging, when they feel validated for being a man in a world where there's a lot of man haters, right?
Yeah.
So I just thought that was really interesting too, of like, we don't need to villainize the men behind, who are interacting with the manosphere but we need to offer them something else in place of something so negative. But Lisa, I wanted to hear your perspective about that. If there's anything that concerns you about those messages, if you see it coming up in your work or anything like that.
So this was something I recently learned about, essentially preparing for this podcast. So the term toxic masculinity, I've heard, but so this was new. And then learning from Roshni, how much she sees it or saw it in high school is a little surprising to me, to be honest. But I think it is bringing to light that, young boys are looking for role models and what does masculinity look like and what is it? And so I think us having good role models access for them to help them understand what healthy relationships are and what respect looks like and what consent looks like, what rejection looks like, and all of those really important things. And so, really being able to help them understand that that they can be masculine without being aggressive or controlling. You can be kind and supportive, and really having those examples for them. But I think through high school, I'm not sure what that looks like in a high school. Yeah, I'm kind of a little surprised at hearing this.
Yeah. And I think what you said is like in the absence of trusted mentors, that's when they're looking for mentors online. And maybe that's when, and again, that's why so much of our prevention programming is centered on that mentorship piece, because and I think you would agree with this, Lisa, that like every child needs that healthy mentor in their life. If it's not their parent, it needs to be someone else to show them and to teach them these healthy ways. And again, like we know what the manosphere promotes, but KP, take us through, what does healthy masculinity look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, we really hear the toxic masculinity. And I think we've even said this on our first podcast. A lot of what Jen and I think laws in general, what we try to do is focus on that strengths-based and focusing on healthy masculinity and what that looks like. And Lisa, you already kind of mentioned a few of them already, that respect for others in general, regardless of who someone is, having empathy for others, that ability to not just look at someone and say, oh, that sucks that that happened to you, but saying, I see that you're struggling. I'm here for you. What do you need? As well as accountability. I think that spreads across all genders as well. But regardless of, what you've done, I think it's so important for everyone, but including men, to take accountability for things that they have done, and having good mentors for that, it goes such a far way. I'll even go as far as to say, like, I was one that was really bad at saying the word sorry after I'd ever done anything wrong. And finally, like, seeing, like, my parents say it in ways and more often in public, it's like, oh, okay, that makes it much more easier for me. So seeing examples of accountability, emotional intelligence, being aware that they can emote. It is okay to cry. It is okay to be angry and sad and frustrated and embarrassed, and all of these things are okay. And it's important to know what those emotions look like and identify coping strategies for ourselves. So a lot, again, with Jen and I's work with like healthy relationships and consent and rejection, we say everyone in their lives has been rejected. And if they haven't yet, they will. And what does that look like once you are rejected? Because everyone has those feelings of anger, embarrassment, disdain towards the person maybe, but how do you cope with those feelings that you're having in the moment to still be respectful to someone else because they asserted a boundary that they're able to have? And another thing with men, respecting boundaries, knowing they have their own boundaries that they deserve to have respected as well. Everyone has a right to have their boundaries respected. Healthy relationships, encouraging what that looks like. And a big thing I think with healthy masculinity is asking for help. We would used to do this activity called the man box activity. And one of the things that is an example of in the man box, in this 1950s, 1960s gender stereotypes for men box, is the phrase, men don't ask for directions. And it's just something as simple as that. And I even witnessed that. Sorry, Dad, if you're listening, but that was a thing where growing up, if we were driving and he kind of got lost, it was, Bill, are we lost? No, I got it. And it's just this feeling overall of like, he has to be the one to know what he's doing. He can't ask for help. And it is totally okay for men and boys to ask for help. That is a sign of understanding your limits, understanding your boundaries, and going to those support people that you have. But of course, for that to happen, we want to make sure that all men have that person on their side. That is the person that they can go to when they do need support. So we really love to focus on that strengths-based, healthy masculinity. What can you do instead of what can't you do?
Yeah, and these are all, examples of things that we do in our prevention programming. Like KP mentioned, a few activities that we do. Like I said, we were just in the juvenile detention center last week doing these things with the kiddos there. They're amazing. And it's really just it all comes back to how are we living our values, right? And what are our values, right? And how do we create that space to live our values offline and online, right? We talked a lot about last week of being better personal stewards of our media, putting forth content that is strengths-based and healthy instead of adding to the noise. So yeah, I think it's really it's kind of encompassing that regardless of gender, we want to make sure that it's okay, like KP was saying, to be rejected, to emote, and that doesn't make you any less of a human. Some of the most important people to drive home that message for you, especially to young boys, are trusted adults. So this might, as we kind of close out our podcast for today, this is our last section, and I'm really excited about this conversation because as adults, we often worry that we're going to say the wrong thing. So what actually helps? So I want to ask our most recent teenager, Rajni, of what makes an adult feel safe to talk to? What makes teens not want to open up, or what do adults do that maybe accidentally shut the conversation down?
I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just like knowing that they're gonna listen before they react, I feel like teenagers can kind of pretty quickly get a read on adults and see, if, oh, are they actually listening to me, or are they gonna say are they gonna say something right after I finish this, And it's also important to feel like you're not gonna get in trouble for just like saying something, whether it's with your parents, like in the school space, whatever it is. And so that, and also consistency. So like, just showing up for someone time and time again so they know that they can come to you, even if it starts off small, with the smaller like problems, and then just keep showing up for them until they feel comfortable enough, and just, yeah. And kind of like the accidentally shutting conversation down, I would say like the hard part about, I guess, kind of talking to adults sometimes is just like they don't really understand a lot of like, I guess, what you're going through, but more so just like even like things like, okay, like for example, we were talking about the Manosphere, and while you guys are just like looking at that from like a kind of like learning perspective, like this is just what we're talking about strictly like, as our lives, so kind of just feeling that bridge of being like, okay, what is in a teenager's life and what can I kind of talk to them about to understand them better. I'm not saying talk to them about like, clavicular, I'm not saying do any of that, but also just like kind of understand that like they live this completely like different life, and they have so much of this like these things that they can't talk to you about. So just like, kind of talk to them about those type of things. Like, what are they seeing on social media? What, like, what's happening? Like, what is their opinion on certain things? Just be willing to hear them out. And so, and then about the accidentally shutting conversation down, I would definitely say like, again, like saying things like, you're going to get over this, or, talking about, oh, like I went through this, like in my age, like, oh, like back in my day, like all of that type of stuff doesn't really make like us feel better. And even if like obviously they have good intentions, it's like comparing experiences can make it feel like, oh, I'm not allowed to be upset about certain things, or things like that. And like KP was saying earlier, obviously there's so many more like problems or issues, I guess, we're facing or looking at now that adults didn't really go through with social media. And that's not to say that we have more problems, I feel like that's something that's commonly misunderstood, is like, oh, well, we had all these problems. And it's like, we're never comparing ourselves with adults. So I feel like it's something we should get back in return, is like, you shouldn't compare yourself with what we're going through or what we're facing. And it's not to say that, oh, we're going through all these huge issues and social media is this like crazy thing. We're all so stressed out about it. Like social media has great, like there's a lot of things you can learn on there. You can watch this podcast on there, for example, without social media. Like you wouldn't even be able to watch this. So there's a lot of great things that happen with it. So it's not to say that social media is this huge, like bad, evil or anything, but just like it brings a lot of challenges, and it brings a lot of complexities that adults didn't face. So just understanding that what you went through is not the same thing as what people are going through right now, and just being able to admit that and being able to say, okay, there's things I need to learn and there's things I can learn, and really asking questions, talking to people instead of like making assumptions, it can go a long way.
I love that. I love that advice.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, I was just going to say, it's kind of like social media and technology, they're part of our lives. They're not going anywhere. And so it's kind of like, I love what you were saying too. It's, we're not trying to compare ourselves to the past generation. We're not trying to be like, well, they had to go through World War II during 8th grade kind of thing. That's not what we're doing. But like at the same time, it's kind of like what you're saying is, it's like how we say trauma is not comparative. Each of these experiences, we can't compare, one's worse than the other. We all have to understand that each one is going through their own struggles, but that's just how life is in that moment. And it's just on all of us to adapt to that, involve it into our regular form of conversation, and include that in things like healthy relationships are not just offline, they are online as well, and normalizing that. I love that.
Mhm.
And
I really like what Roshni said, because even though technology is there, it's not going anywhere. The needs of young children and youth are the same from when I grew up to kids now, of needing to be connected, of understanding healthy relationships, privacy, boundaries, consent, all of those things, having a safe person that they can talk to. So all of those things, regardless of whether technology is in your life or not, are really important. And so kind of, I think, as I'm hearing you reminding myself, those are the needs of young people. And so in talking with parents of, their relationship with their child and safety really is not only having the conversations of that we're talking about, but these are skills that you build through your life. So if you're starting with your child young of not only modeling the behaviors, but talking to them about, school instead of, how was school? It was fine. Tell me all about school. Tell me all about recess. Really open-ended questions and allowing them to speak freely and be curious about that and just build upon that. How did you feel? How did your friend feel? That's, building empathy and resilience. And so really starting young, couple minutes every day. And, as they get older, then they have those tools and resources to draw on. But if we just start at high school with a conversation with, things that they haven't even been aware of or exposed to, it just makes it a little more difficult. Not that they can't, but I think so being that trusted adult, being open, non-judgmental, understanding they've got something to share, something important, and not allowing punishment or you're going to lose your phone or things like that. If they're coming to you for help, that's a good thing. And the response is, thank you for telling me. I believe you. We'll get through this together. Really is what they need in that moment. And then for younger children, I know we're talking more online, but for younger children, the body safety, using the proper names for body parts and starting that very young and being okay with those conversations is also something that helps keep kids safe.
I love that. Of starting early. I mean, Jen and I will repeat it till the day we die, is start that conversation early and continue it, make it repetitive. And like you said, these are skills we're working on. These conversations are building these skills. And so it's not just one day you talk about boundaries and the next we move on. It's how can we incorporate that discussion on boundaries into the more conversations that we're having down the road. But I love that. Staying calm, asking questions, not judging. Those are such important things that every trusted adult can do for a child. So. Well, we want to wrap up today's discussion with our prevention pop quiz that we like to do at the end. I do just want to preface for you guys, you're not getting graded. It's just, we want to hear from you. But we just like to kind of round out with just easy questions. It's nothing like it has to be this fact. So Roshni, I first want to ask you, and we kind of asked you this a little bit earlier, but one piece of advice that you think parents could use about their teens, and what's one thing you think every teen needs to hear as well?
So I would say for parents or adults, I would say don't wait until there's a problem to have these conversations, If the only time you're talking to your kids is about relationships, safety, social media is when there's a problem, it's going to feel more like, kind of like an intervention rather than, okay, you're just like kind of informing them. And so just like making those conversations normal, like Lisa was talking about earlier as well, like, and not making it feel like it's this huge conversation once and that's never going to happen again. It's like a serious moment, nothing like that. And I feel like for teens, I would say, like, don't feel like you have to figure out everything by yourself, whether it's something that's kind of happening online, friendships, relationships, whatever it is. It's very easy to turn to the internet for answers and kind of just look for this quick and easy fix. But like sometimes, like I would say talking to the actual person you can trust is going to give a greater range of perspectives that the internet could ever offer. And so whether it's, reaching out to your peers or reaching out to your friends or reaching out to adults or your parents or someone in like the school space, whatever it is, like just making connections, honestly, just so you can feel also less alone in the issue and know that there are people going through the same things and, just talking rather than turning to the screen. So, yeah.
I love that. Thanks, Rashi. And Lisa, what's one thing that you think every parent needs to hear when discussing their child's safety?
That your kids won't always come to you when there's a problem. So that continual conversation of understanding what's going on in their life and just being aware and being connected. When they do come to you, like KP said, take a deep breath, listen, be open, be curious, and you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to come up with, I think like Roshni said, well, when I was young, you don't have to have the answer. A lot of times they just want to be heard and just, I believe you, I love you, thank you for sharing, that type of thing. And so, but it really is that open conversation. Even if you have to come up with a code word, like, okay, I need to have a difficult conversation. Our code word is pancake, or, or something. So the parents know, okay, this is important and I need to sit down and I need to be open and I need to listen, it's really going to keep kids safe.
I love that. And I love having the code word too, of just like pancake. Like when you talk about things like it's perfect. It doesn't always have to be this like going up to your mom and her 80 friends and being like, I need to talk about something difficult. You can always find ways to make that easier. Awesome. And I think today's conversation has really reminded us that while technology is continuing to change, it grows more and more. Young people's needs really aren't changing. I think, Lisa, you said it yourself of at the end of the day, kids still want and teens still want what they've always wanted. And that's that belonging and connection and trusted adults who listen and care.
Yeah. Prevention really starts and ends with relationships. So sometimes it's checking in after school. Sometimes it's asking, like we said, starting with curiosity instead of jumping to conclusions. And sometimes it's simply just being someone a young person knows that they can count on.
Yeah. And our team ourselves, we are out there in the schools. We are working on these conversations with kids as well. So everyone, you may hear us or about our prevention team in Loudoun County Public Schools. We have a great relationship with the school system and work with different administrative departments like Title IX, Family Life Education, and students like the peer students. So this school, our team will be working with a few high schools to implement healthy relationship, social norms campaigns, and we'll also be in some of the elementary schools to facilitate those parent workshops that really focus on that developmentally and age-appropriate way to talk with kids about body safety and being safe online.
Okay.
Prevention across the life course, right? We also we like to end our segments with upcoming events and ways that you can get involved if you like this conversation, if you want to support laws. So we wanted to invite all of our listeners to something really special. It's our annual fundraiser. This year marks the 10th anniversary of Corks for a Cause. On Friday, October 2nd, we'll be at Stone Tower Winery for a really amazing evening of exceptional wine, delicious food, live music, raffles, exclusive experiences, and more than anything, just a celebration of the hope and healing that Laws makes possible. And through the community, like you all. Every ticket helps provide life-saving services to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse in our community. And we'll have the QR code here, so you can scan the QR code on your screen to purchase tickets or reserve a table or become a sponsor. And we really hope that you'll celebrate that incredible milestone with us. This will be the first of many events Laws will be hosting during October, which also is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So stay tuned, follow us on social media. The good part of social media, right, is have to stay tuned to these events. And we'll be sharing more opportunities to honor survivors, build awareness, and learn practical ways to prevent violence in our community.
And if you're interested in any way of helping with Laws right now, our next volunteer training isn't until the fall, but there is an immediate need for support in general. So if you are interested in hosting a donation drive for hygiene products, items like shampoo, conditioner, deodorant, liquid body wash, lotion, feminine pads are always appreciated and directly support survivors who are accessing our services. So every action, no matter what, no matter how small or how big, really creates a safer and more supportive community. So.
And if you have just general questions for Laws, you can always call our main office line. That is 703-771-3398. If you have a question about relationships or about, an abuse disclosure, you can speak directly with an advocate. And that is our 24/7 hotline at 703-777-6552.
And you can also follow us on social media. Again, like Jen said, the good part. So we have on Instagram, we are at Laws LCSJ, and then Laws Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Services on Facebook and LinkedIn.
And any other questions for us, if you have topic ideas, if you have just any comments about, what we discussed today, you can always email our team. That's preventionoutreach@lcsj.org.
And a huge thank you to both of our guests, our first guests ever on the podcast. Let me just say thank you to Lisa Donovan and Roshni Rao for joining us today, sharing your perspectives. We really enjoyed talking with you guys, getting those different perspectives, and really hope that this conversation gives, kids, teens, parents, educators, coaches, just general community members a little more confidence in just supporting the young people in their lives.
So thanks for listening to Partners in Prevention. For our Spanish-speaking audience members, join us next time for an episode for Hispanic Heritage Month. And then coming up in October, we'll recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month by diving into more of the intersectionality of domestic violence.
So until next time, remember that creating safer communities starts with everyday conversations, and every one of us has a role to play. But thank you guys so much for joining in again, and we'll see you next time.